There we go, okay. You guys were all ready to go when that music stopped, so welcome back to it. Just as a reminder, the way tonight will work is we will go through the fill-in-the-blank notes, and then as we wrap that up, we'll have some acoustic worship after we do group discussion, and so very excited about this. If you're missing any of the fill-in-the-blanks, you can ask me afterwards. If you're watching on the Liberty live stream, then this does end after the teaching portion because we don't live stream all of the table discussions. But last session where we started this, Ecclesiastes opened with a difficult observation about life. The teacher, as we call him, looked at the world and described it as vapor, something that is real but fleeting and something you can't grab a hold of. He kept calling it hevel, and y'all will probably remember hevel often gets translated one of two ways. One is vanity, the other thing is, anybody? Meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And so he's basically trying to say this: life is fragile, you can see it, but you can't control it. And so if life is so brief and difficult to control, where does real meaning come from? And so as chapter 2 begins, the teacher decides that he's going to approach that question from a different angle. If wisdom alone can't untangle the mystery of what life is, maybe finding things to enjoy can. He's thinking maybe the answer to life is not deeper thinking, but more fuller living. And so if life feels empty, maybe the solution is to fill it with laughter and entertainment and experiences and pleasure. And so the teacher is actually going to begin with an experiment, as you'll see. But what he decides is that instead of observing life from a distance, he's going to step directly into the pursuit of pleasure and see what life brings them. Many of us have walked that road already. But that impulse that he does is one of the defining things about our modern culture today. When life feels stressful or confusing or unsatisfying, the most common advice that people hear is pretty simple. It's some form of enjoy yourself more. Have fun, take the trip, buy the thing, upgrade your lifestyle, find the experience that will make you feel alive again. Entire industries are actually built on the promise that the next experience will finally deliver satisfaction to us. Every advertisement you see for anything ever is essentially saying you're missing something, but we have the answer. And so the teacher in Ecclesiastes has a rare ability to test that theory in ways that most people never could. Just as a recap, he was extraordinarily wealthy, had immense power and creative freedom and the ability to pursue literally anything he wanted to do. That's why the teacher uses the voice of King Solomon, even if it's likely not King Solomon. But long after Ecclesiastes records this experiment, I just wanted to share this at the beginning tonight. Jesus himself would address the same human instinct in the same way. In one of his teachings, he warns us in Mark 8:34 through 38. That's not in your notes, just a bonus if you want it. Mark 8:34 through 38, he says, after calling the crowd to join his disciples, he says, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you'll save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world and lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. It's the same thing that he's addressing, just again from a different viewpoint. But what Jesus says here, it talks about a deeper struggle that sits beneath the pursuit of pleasure. A person can accumulate all of the experiences, all of the possessions and success, and still discover that something is missing. And the problem isn't that enjoyment exists. It's something that we are all welcome to pursue. But Scripture is consistent when it shows that joy and celebration and good gifts are all part of God's design. It's okay. The problem comes when we begin expecting those gifts to carry the weight of our meaning and our identity. So if pleasure can entertain us, but it can't really anchor us to the Lord, where does lasting meaning actually come from? For the first two verses, Ecclesiastes 2, the first two verses, I'm calling this the promise of pleasure. And he says this: I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found that this too was meaningless. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? Well, the teacher doubles down and he makes this decision like we talked about, that he's going to run an experiment, and he says to himself, let's try pleasure. So in other words, if wisdom can't unlock the meaning of life, then maybe enjoyment could. Your blank there is enjoyment. And that phrase is translated as let's try, when he says, come on, let's try pleasure. It comes from a Hebrew expression that is actually pronounced nasakana, and it carries the whole meaning or idea of testing or proving something. The teacher is basically saying, I don't know if this will work, so we'll put it to the test, we'll give it a shot. He's intentionally putting pleasure on trial to see if it can hold up and deliver satisfaction. He's trying to explore whether or not this is actually what people are searching for. And so a lot of people genuinely wonder this. If life feels confusing and temporary, I wonder if the best response is simply to enjoy it as much as possible. We say things all the time about this, don't we? You can't take it with you when you go. So we talk about all of these ways to justify what we want to do. And so he describes the search as looking for the good things in life. Now, if I were to ask you to write down what the good things are in life, like a top 10 list of the good things to pursue in life, we would probably get a whole bunch of different lists. And there'd probably be a lot of overlap, but we probably prioritize a few things differently. So what are the good things? Well, the Hebrew word behind the idea is tov. Tov means good, pleasant, or beneficial. That's your blank there, it's beneficial. Good or pleasant or beneficial. It's the same word, by the way, that is used all throughout Genesis when God looked at his creation and declared it good. So it's a pretty powerful good. And some people might recognize that word also from the familiar phrase mazel tov. Mazel tov. It's heard a lot of time at Jewish celebrations, and mazel refers to fortune or blessing. Tov carries the idea of goodness or well-being. So he's looking at these things and saying, let's pursue the good things. So when someone says mazel tov, they're celebrating a good thing happening in someone's life. Pleasure itself in this is not presented as evil. You'll notice that. So it's not one of these deals where somebody is calling you hedonistic for trying to pursue pleasure. Enjoyment and laughter and celebration, they're all part of this world that God has created, and I'm so grateful for that. But the teacher's question isn't whether the good things exist. His question is whether good things will satisfy the human heart. And that's why this experiment begins with laughter, something that we've all experienced. Laughter represents the lightest and most immediate form of pleasure. And so when somebody laughs, unless it's a fake one, it shows that they really are enjoying that moment. Something struck them as funny. Is there anybody you can think of that has one of those laughs that makes you laugh, either with them or at them? Well, the teacher quickly reaches an uncomfortable conclusion about that. He says, well, laughter is silly. What good does pleasure actually do? And so that word that's translated as silly comes from the Hebrew word halal. In some ways, that word can mean praise or celebration, but in other ways, it carries the sense of something that is foolish or empty. And we talk about laughter when it's attached to pleasure, but is there anybody here or anybody like watching online, do you laugh when you get uncomfortable? Yes. Right? Halal, all right. The teacher's not condemning laughter itself. He's just saying, well, laughter doesn't really fill your life either, does it? Laughter can distract us. It just can't fulfill us. And entertainment as a form can always give us temporary relief, but it still doesn't answer the deeper questions of life. And so as laughter fades, the same questions often come right back. And the teacher is starting to uncover something important that we're going to see. Pleasure can stimulate the senses, but it can't settle the soul. So when the search for pleasure or enjoyment becomes the foundation of our search for meaning, it will always reveal its limits. It's good. It's just not enough. If you're new to this, you'll see personal insight questions at the end of each section. Those are for you to do in your own time. If you'd like to go a little deeper, we won't go through those here. So the next section is just over verse 3. So Ecclesiastes 2, verse 3 is the experiment with escape. And I'm glad that we're doing this because I'll be honest with you, one of the first times I got to preach on a Sunday for Pastor Tom, who was here before me, I talked about escapism and how sometimes we just look at our life like I have to work until this time so I can finally do what I want to do. And our whole view is just, well, one day I'll get to do anything I want to do. The problem is, as a Christian, your job never really ends. And that's whether you work in vocational ministry or not. Maybe your job at a church or not at a church, it ends at some point, but your call really doesn't. There's always something to do. But if you're only living your life to figure out a way that you can do whatever you want, that's a problem. Not that it's bad to enjoy what you have saved up or enjoy what you've worked towards. Totally okay. That's godly. There's scripture on that too. But again, can't be what you feel like will fulfill you ultimately because it won't. And so I preached that, and I felt pretty good about that. Young youth pastor preaching a message like that, and had somebody's visiting grandparents pull me to the side afterwards and say, well, we live in a vacation home. Do you believe we're in sin? It was fun. Anyway, after beginning the experiment and saying laughter and basic pleasure doesn't really help, the teacher moves into something that is a very big strategy. Listen to this verse. After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in this world. So he decided to cheer himself with wine. And the word that is translated heart in the Hebrew, just so you know, is lev. The ancient Hebrew thinking there, lev was not just the place of your emotions. A lot of times today we separate the head and the heart, but lev was not just for emotions. It was the center of a person's thoughts, their desires, and your blank is decisions and direction. In other words, it described the control center of a human being, of their whole life. And so the teacher's not just saying that he wanted to enjoy a drink. He's just describing an attempt to lift or manage his inner life through pleasure. And a lot of times that's what we'll do, even if we're saying it as a joke. If something is stressful, I need a drink, or something like that. So the statement that he makes there is important because he's also showing that his pursuit isn't careless. It's something he considered carefully. He's not writing a lesson about alcohol. I've heard this one used in alcohol. There are other ones that do apply. But he's not talking about even getting drunk. He's just saying, I just thought I would go ahead and experience a good drink and see if that'll help change my inner thoughts. The issue here is not the drink. It's the human instinct to try to escape the weight of life through the drink or through anything else. The phrase that is translated here as after much thought comes from the Hebrew expression, which is nahag lev. And we just talked about lev, which is the heart. It literally means to guide or lead the heart. Lead the heart. In other words, here, the teacher is saying he's intentionally directing his own desires. He's not accidentally stumbling into a drink, as most people don't. He explains that he has decided to cheer himself with wine, and that idea right there of cheering or stimulating the heart is mashak. That's the whole idea of drawing something along or pulling it forward. Pulling it forward. So that image is like trying to pull your heart into a better mood. Your heart doesn't want to, but you're trying to encourage it. One time when we were taking a group of people down to Guatemala, they were bringing a cow up a very narrow path on a hill to go deliver it to a family. And this cow got scared and would not go all the way up the hill. And they were trying hard to pull this cow. And eventually most of us left. And I think the idea was, hey, this cow's gonna get up to the top of the hill one way or the other, but you may not like to see how it's gonna happen. They did get the cow up the hill on its legs. But trying to pull it, and that's the way it is for us sometimes. When we are in a foul mood, when we're in a foul headspace, it's why David had to write in the Psalms so often, come on my soul, and have to try and stir himself up. That's the image that you see there with Mashak, is trying to pull the heart forward. Because when life feels heavy, people will often look for something that'll lift their spirits or temporarily numb what they feel. Most often, that one. What will distract me? What will help me disassociate? But it's important to notice that he adds something that is very interesting. And this is probably my favorite thing about this whole chapter that I learned as I went through this study. He's not abandoning wisdom here. Even though he says he clutches at foolishness, it says he's attempting to hold on to wisdom while exploring indulgence. That shows how easily people try to balance both worlds, doesn't it? We want the benefits of wisdom, but we also want the relief that comes from escape. And so the verse where he says clutched at foolishness is sikluth. It refers to behavior that ignores wisdom or, here's your blank, temporarily sets it aside. And that's probably a good way to put what we do into words. Temporarily sets wisdom aside. We know the right thing to do, but you know what? It's been a long day. It's been a long week. It's been a rough season. Things have been crazy, because it's always crazy. Isn't that what we say now? Man, how are things going? They've been crazy. Man, what are the odds? Me too. So what happens is we start to get fed up and we say, man, I just need relief. I know this is not the right thing to do, but I'll take this wisdom and I'll temporarily put it to the side. I'll come back to it in the morning. It would have been extra foolish back then. Right now we do it because we know how forgiving Jesus is, and we take advantage of that mercy all the time. But the teacher is acknowledging something that is pretty honest. We know what is wise. but we often still choose a path that offers us temporary relief, and we just assume we'll make up for it the next day. Eventually, the teacher explains why he ran this experiment at all. He says he was trying to discover what kind of happiness people should pursue during what he calls the brief life in this world. Although I'm gloriously middle-aged, I know that the older you get, the more brief life seems. You would think that the longer you live, the longer it seems, but the older you get, I'm sure I don't have to convince you, the more brief it seems. And so that Hebrew phrase that is brief life again connects to the word hevel we were talking about in chapter 1, that life is vapor-like, it's short, it's fragile, you can't control it, and you see it for a moment, and the next moment, it's gone. That question is still something that drives a lot of us today. So I'd ask you, when life feels stressful or overwhelming, what common advice do you hear that points you towards a form of escape? It might not be wine, although I've talked to enough people, it might be. Sometimes it is entertainment or distraction or social media or doom scrolling. Isn't it crazy that even the term is doom scrolling? Comfort spending. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant retail therapy. Or any number of the ways that people try to temporarily silence what they're feeling on the inside. It just doesn't work as a big picture. And so the teacher in this chapter is trying to help us recognize something about our own hearts. And remember, we said this last week, we love to look at scriptures and look at them as a window to view other people, but if you are willing to look at it as a mirror, it'll be much more beneficial. Ecclesiastes is showing us that escaping life, this is important. You don't have a test, but man, if you did. Escaping life and understanding life are two very different paths. And when it's laid out that way before you, which one would you choose? Well, of course, we want to understand life. To ultimately escape life is not really the option that we're looking for. But we're going to see what it is to build the dream life next in verses 4-6. The teacher goes on and he says this, I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water to irrigate my many flourishing groves. Now, before we step into the building projects here, it helps to recognize that this kind of pursuit still informs the way that a lot of us think today. And when I say us, I'm specifically talking about Americans. In America, we describe it as the American dream. By the way, I don't want to live anywhere else, so I'm not here to bash America. But what is the American dream? Work hard, build something meaningful, own a home, create stability, and leave something behind for the next generation. Nothing wrong with any one of those things, again, unless that is your ultimate meaning or fulfillment. For a lot of people, the dream is not just about comfort, it's about proving that their life counted for something. You don't have anything to prove to another human being about what you built with your life or didn't build with your life. We're all accountable to the Lord. So the assumption that we live by is simple. If we can build enough or achieve enough or create the right kind of life, then I'm sure meaning will follow, but it never does. So after looking at pleasure and escape, the teacher's now moving on to the path that people will chase all too often in their search for meaning, which is accomplishment. So instead of simply, here's your first blank here, instead of simply enjoying life, he begins building a life. And isn't it hard to enjoy something while you're in the process of building it? You may enjoy building things, and that's great, but what I'm saying is you enjoy your house a lot more when you move into it than when it's being built. And so he's surrounded by blessings, and he doesn't even know how to enjoy them. So he talks about houses, vineyards, gardens, parks, and he talks about irrigation systems. They all begin to appear here because he's showing how successful and how productive he is. And the language he's using here is really showing how intentional all of it was, because his life was filled with activity. Maybe the options for escape I mentioned earlier don't apply to you. But how many of us just try to stay busy because we're too afraid to be alone with our own thoughts? I used to not even want to be alone for time with the Lord. Except for maybe a 5 to 10 minute prayer, I was too afraid of what the Lord might tell me. And for good reason, because he'll mess you up. The word that's translated as made, it shows a deliberate effort and construction. That word translated made is asa, and it is a very broad and very descriptive word. It's used in a lot of contexts. It can be used to do or to make or to accomplish, or to produce something through effort. To produce something through effort. It is also a similar word used in Genesis when God made the world. So we've seen how he called it good, and now the word on how he made the world. In other words, the teacher here is describing large intentional acts of creation and accomplishment. And you should also know that in Hebrew thought, building something was often connected to the idea of establishing a legacy. They all wanted to build something that was going to remain for years and years after. That was part of what they wanted. They wanted their name to live on. They wanted their accomplishments to live on. And so because of that, this was something he was looking for. They were all symbols of stability or influence or long-term success. By the way, you ever notice when somebody does have some sort of inheritance, it doesn't make people feel impressed by them? What do we normally say? Like, oh, you got daddy's money, or, must have been nice to get that inheritance. I mean, it doesn't make anybody respect you, but we still try to set up our loved ones in this way. So the teacher goes on to really double down, and he talks about planting vineyards, which again, in the ancient world, it really represented prosperity and security. The average person may have had farming of some sort, but it wasn't going to be a vineyard because grapes required years of care before they ever produced fruit. So planting a vineyard was an investment, and a flourishing vineyard communicated that you were wealthy. And he also describes creating gardens and parks that are filled with fruit trees. That Hebrew word that's used for parks there is pardes. That word is referring to like an enclosed garden or some sort of royal park that is associated with beauty or luxury or abundance. Abundance is your word. And I just thought this was kind of cool. So that word, it's pronounced pardes. That word would later travel into other languages and eventually became the origin of the English word paradise. Paradise. So these are not small backyard gardens. These are not like when you visit a friend and you go, oh my goodness, are those Roma tomatoes? What are you doing? No, this was something extravagant. This was something that would have cost him. And so to sustain all of this, he builds reservoirs and talks about collecting water for irrigation. It's a really random flex, but he's trying to be thorough in this. He's trying to show just how much effort he's invested in shaping his world around him. And so this shows us something that's important about our heart. When pleasure does not satisfy us, then we turn to productivity. Here's the problem with a productive person. They are never satisfied. Look at all you've done. Aren't you excited about what you've accomplished? I would be, but there's so much more to do. Congratulations, we've all arrived together. So we convince ourselves that if we can just build enough or achieve enough or accomplish enough, then our lives are finally going to feel meaningful, but they don't. And so a lot of people today still chase what we would call the dream life. And maybe for you, it's a successful career or a beautiful home or impressive accomplishments or just a lifestyle that reflects achievement. Again, none of these things are wrong by themselves. Hard work is important. Creativity is a gift from the Lord. But renewing our minds in this study, it's going to require us to recognize the difference between building something meaningful and building something ultimate. And those are your blanks. We have to learn the difference between building something meaningful and building something ultimate. Work and achievement are great gifts from God, but they were never meant to become the foundation of our identity. But the teacher is now about to discover something that a lot of successful people eventually realize too. Even when you do build a life that everybody admires, the question of meaning will still remain. So verses 7 and 8 are next. This is power, wealth, and entertainment. The teacher goes all out. All right, he says, I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I also owned large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and had many beautiful concubines. I had everything a man could desire. All right. Well, as the teacher is continuing to describe his search for meaning, the experiment grows larger because he had accomplishment, things he had built, and now he's turning towards something that's also powerful in the human experience, which is influence and wealth and luxury. So if building a successful life doesn't satisfy the heart, maybe complete abundance could. Complete abundance could. Normally what we do when we see somebody have abundance in an area we don't is we say something like this, must be nice. It's like the most passive-aggressive way to say, I hope your vacation was awful, that there is. The description in these verses is really important. The teacher is talking about servants filling his household, massive herds and flocks, enormous amounts of things that he needs other people to manage. He can't even manage everything he's built. That's how much he has. So again, in the ancient world, he surrounded himself with everything people thought would bring fulfillment and then needed people to help manage the things that provide fulfillment. In modern terms, we call this mo money, mo problems. One of the key words in this section, though, is the word that is translated as servant. The Hebrew word there is ebed, and it refers to someone in specific who served a household, or under the authority of another. In the New Testament, when you see things being discussed like being a slave of Christ, that word is Greek, it's doulos, but here it's ebed, and it meant complete loyalty to a household. So they were completely loyal to this household and managing all of the irrigation and reservoirs and gardens and parks that he had. And that would be including jobs that we would now call administrators, laborers, craftsmen, musicians, and attendants that were all there purely just to make sure this place continued to run the way it was supposed to. The teacher's describing a household that is so large it requires an entire system of people in order to continue to function. And he's still not happy. But he also describes owning more herds and flocks than anyone who had lived in Jerusalem before him. And in the ancient world, livestock was not just a source of food, it was also a visible symbol of wealth, just like the vineyards. And the size of a person's herds communicated their level of prosperity, so the larger the herds, the greater the influence, which is your blank there, the influence. Then he talks about gathering silver and gold. Am I the only one that heard the Christmas song? All right, so I'm not the, okay. All right, silver and gold. The Hebrew word for silver is kesef, and it is translated literally as silver. You're welcome. However, because it was silver, the word also came to represent money. Money, that's your blank, or financial wealth in general, in the same way that green can represent money today, or, When the teacher says he accumulated silver and gold from kings and provinces, he's also talking about being a massive economic power. But even wealth wasn't the end of the experiment in these verses. He then filled his life with entertainment and luxury. We talked about some of those servants to the household he had. He talks about servants, singers, both men and women, to perform within his royal court. Music and artistic performance were also central to royal celebrations. I don't know if you know this or not, but today most people don't have musicians in their house. I mean, maybe you're raising them, maybe you're hearing them play hot cross buns on the recorder, but you don't normally hire people to just be there and play music in case it hits your fancy. The teacher mentions even concubines, describing them among the delights of men. So he's talking about sexual pleasure in this too. And the Hebrew word associated with that idea of pleasure or delight is pronounced ta'anug. That word carries the sense of luxury or sensual enjoyment. I made that one the blank just so you'd be uncomfortable writing it. Or indulgence. In other words, the teacher explored not just wealth and power, but every form of luxury that his status could provide. So when we read this section, it's clear that the teacher really is testing a powerful assumption we still have today, that fulfillment will come if we reach a certain level of success. And that's normally our workaround, isn't it? Normally our workaround is, I don't think that having this will make me feel fulfilled, but I think that once I have this, fulfillment will follow. It's so elusive though, isn't it? The deeper lesson here is not that wealth or influence or that enjoyment are inherently wrong. I can't stress that enough. But if it takes the place that the Lord is supposed to have in our life, then we're going to continue to look for purpose because it just won't fill that gap. So after all of this big experiment has been performed, now we arrive at the final section, which is the moment of evaluation. Ecclesiastes 2, verses 9 through 11. Missed a blank? Yeah. Renewing our minds means that we have to recognize how much this assumption influences the way that we think about life, because our culture constantly declares that happiness is just one level higher than where we are now. But think about it. Isn't that brilliant the way that it's laid out? Because if culture convinced us that it was 50 levels higher, we wouldn't even try. But surely you can just go one level higher. But everybody here has one streaming service that they subscribe to, right? Isn't that crazy? We're always done until the new show comes out. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 9 through 11 is the moment of evaluation. And here's how he ends this section, which is really just halfway through this chapter. He says, "So I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me." That must be nice. He said, "Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I'd worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile there." So after talking about the pleasure, the accomplishment, the wealth, the influence, all the luxury, now the teacher pauses, because up until this point, his story has been filled with activity. He's been building homes and vineyards and gardens and accumulating wealth and surrounding himself with all sorts of pleasure. But for the first time in this experiment, he steps back and evaluates everything he has pursued. He evaluates everything he's pursued. So before giving us his conclusion, he first acknowledges just how successful the experiment had been. That's important. I mean, think about this just logically. If he said, "I ran this experiment and the experiment was a failure," well, then his results would not be worth looking at. But he said, "Oh, I was successful by every measure. And once I was successful, here's what I found." It's an important detail because the teacher was not a careless man who lost himself in reckless living. He did everything in the pursuit of pleasure wisely. And verse 10 shows just how far the experiment went, because the teacher says he denied himself nothing his eyes desired. Nothing his eyes desired. Anything he wanted, he took. If there was pleasure to enjoy, he enjoyed it. If there was a project to pursue, he pursued it. If there was an experience to gain, he would allow himself to experience it. He even admits something that a lot of people can relate to, and I can certainly relate to it. He says he found pleasure in his work. The effort of building or creating or accomplishing brought a sense of reward. And for many of us, when we do a good job at something, we're really thrilled and we're glad that we did it. There's an honesty here that makes the scriptures that is so real. Hard work is satisfying, and achievement does bring moments of joy, but they are still moments. Progress can be motivating. But the teacher says, "As I looked at everything I worked so hard to accomplish," that phrase there that is translated "looked at," it comes from a Hebrew word, panah, which means to turn towards something in order to examine it carefully. And the teacher is not glancing at it. He's intentionally pausing and turning his attention towards everything he's built so he can say, "Did this bring me meaning?" And the teacher allows us to see what happens when someone actually reaches that destination. Even at the top of success, the deeper question of meaning still remains. His evaluation becomes a challenge for us to step back and to examine our own pursuits. I believe that's your final blank, to examine our own pursuits. It makes us ask whether we're chasing something that's truly going to satisfy the soul or something that'll just eventually feel like chasing the wind.